Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast, powered by ISOFIT and Firefly Recovery. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training. For more on ISOFIT, be sure to check out isofit.com. Episodes like this are made possible by Firefly, the official recovery provider of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. For more on Firefly, be sure to check out recoveryfirefly.com. This episode is powered by Dr. Ray Gorman, founder of Engage Movement. Learn how to boost your income without relying on sessions. Get a free training on the blended practice model by following at Ray Gorman DPT on Instagram. Lee, welcome to the podcast, man. I'm super excited to work with you and so glad we were able to connect in person back in February down in Texas there, man. For people who aren't familiar with you and all the amazing things that you've been doing, in particular in the basketball space, would you mind filling in a little about who you are and all the amazing things you got going on, dude?
Sure. So I was born in Seoul, South Korea, came to America when I was 10 months old, be adopted and grew up in Pennsylvania and Tennessee. Went to school for athletic training and physical therapy. Graduated from PT school in 2016, AT school in 2012, and since then pretty much practice across the country, variety of settings, the NBA G League, military, college athletics, PT clinics, the military. Also had internships with Team USA and the NFL. So I've been pretty fortunate to have a very diverse experiences. And actually a pretty unique journey that led to the basketball world. So this is my 5th year in the G League. I've worked with different teams. Within my years of basketball, I pretty much have worked as having the role of being a head athletic trainer, a physical therapist, and a strength and conditioning coach. So I would say that I'm pretty unique in that aspect. Pretty fortunate in those experiences. So right now we're pretty much finishing up the G League season and pretty much going to work on after that. Go to the parent team to help them finish their NBA season, and then have out with the off season and see where that takes me. That's pretty much where I'm at right now.
Yeah, no, that's exciting stuff, man. And as you mentioned, you've kind of been all over the place and kind of had a hand in a little bit of everything, right? You mentioned football, you mentioned basketball, you mentioned military, you mentioned clinics. It's incredible the journey that you've been on yourself that way. And I really want to dive into that more. First, I got to bust you though, dude. You're older than I thought you were, dude. I didn't realize you graduated 2016. My gosh.
Yeah, I'm a guy in my mid-30s, so I try to make sure I stay healthy and stay active so I can fool people with how old I am.
That's a good thing, man. It's a good thing to fool people in the way that they think you're younger than you actually are. I certainly thought you were younger than you were that way, man. But I want to hear a little bit more about your journey that way, because as you mentioned, you kind of had a unique entry into basketball and you found some unique spaces within basketball that way where you've been AT, PT, S&C, maybe multiple at the same time. So walk me a little bit more through your kind of personal journey in the basketball space, if you will.
So back in 2019, I got a call from one of my AT school classmates, basically told me about a job where our team was looking for someone who had a medical background, but also wanted to dive into more like the strength and conditioning side of it. So he recommended me to the job. I interviewed for it and got the job, fortunately, and pretty much began my first G League season. Crazy as it sounds, that was also the same year that COVID broke out. So, our season stopped early, and then for the next year, I worked for the military as like the main physical therapist on the base. And then like after a year, I got a call from my old boss, who works for the 76ers, and he wanted to talk to me about the idea of interviewing to be the physical therapist for the G League team. Because he and I kept in contact over the years. He's always was like a valuable resource to ask questions about how to get into the league and so on from there. And just, also obviously grow as like a healthcare professional. So for 3 years, I was the physical therapist / unofficial assistant athletic trainer, however you want to say it. For 3 years, been very fortunate with those experiences. Covered practices, games, home and away. Got to have experiences in playoffs. Played a role in helping players transition from, like, say, a G League roster player to a player who could get an NBA 10-day contract to being converted into a two-way And then also some players being converted into an NBA roster player, in a sense. So I've been pretty fortunate to see those full transitions, over the few years. I also played a role in helping an organization win some championships, so some other team and individual accolades over the past few years. And while I pursued like my own professional development coursework as a PT, AT, so been very fortunate with those whole things. And then come October. I heard about this job out here with the Bulls G League team to be their head athletic trainer slash physical therapist. So I interviewed for it, and fortunately got the job and been here since then.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, several stops along the way. And it's interesting too to kind of make that jump from military into sport, I would imagine that way, because there's certain principles that probably carry over very well from that. And then there's other principles that are probably a little bit unique and different. I think a lot of people, if they know about the military PT and the military rehab side of things, they know how on top of things a lot of that is and how much autonomy is given to physical therapists and ATs in the military. And, I mean, there's different things from like almost more of like a primary care type role to ordering imaging and prescribing medications that you can do in the military that, unfortunately we can't do on the civilian side that way. But I'd imagine there's been a lot of those general principles and themeworks and just frameworks that you built when you're in the military that carried over really, really well to your time in the G League that way.
Yes, it's very true that when you work for the military, even if you're a civilian physical therapist, it's very true that you get full direct access. You can order imaging as long as it's appropriate. You can't really order like prescription medicine because they still rely on the PAs and the MDs for that for sure. But you could give suggestions if asked on what would some appropriate medicine be. But we they usually refer to the physicians for that for sure. There actually was a lot of carryover from the military side to working in the G League. Basically because of like how systems and organizations are structured. It's very military style where you report to people through multiple steps in the ladder. So that's very true. But the G League is very unique in itself because of how much you have to adapt. Everyone, it's hired for a specific role, but they use the expression you wear many hats throughout each season. There's plenty of people I know over the years who would serve as like medical providers, but they would also do a lot of small things to help out with the players, like take them to the like Target or a local grocery store to help get groceries because they simply don't have a car with them, but they need stuff to fuel their bodies, or all types of different errands on that end, all the way up to honestly giving them advice on like how to become a better professional athlete, how to develop in that way. So that way, when they're in the position to do well, they can exceed in that. So like one great example we've always given over the years is that you never know how many minutes a player will get in a game. But one thing that you can, as a player, control is how well you perform in those few minutes, whether it be 2 minutes all the way up to 20 minutes. So you just got to make sure that when you perform, because you are going to be recorded, whoever is interested in you will have good film minutes of you versus really crappy ones. So that's the thing that we preached a lot about over the years.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And it's so interesting to hear just how involved the sports med staff is in the development of the player personnel that way from a basketball standpoint. As I think a lot of times, and maybe I'm guilty of this myself, those of us who, aren't in the roles like you've had, we look at it and we think, oh, well, you treat athletes or, you do some modalities, you do some exercise, that sort of thing. And it sounds like there's a lot of extra additional things that go into it beyond just kind of what we typically think of from a traditional PT, AT, S&C kind of role, if you will. And it kind of becomes more about the overall development and a more holistic approach, if you will. And I would imagine, you mentioned that, you've been doing some like Con Ed and just kind of personal development and advancement that way previously. And I'd imagine that some of that is obviously what is needed from a PTAT standpoint and so on, but some of it probably extends beyond that, just since you have to provide so much additional things for the athletes that you do get to serve day in and day out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty crazy. Even as an AT, even within an AT, you have lots of hats to wear within being an AT. Doing simple things like making sure that one, the guys, let's say it's a game day, make sure your game gear is clean, it's in the right locker, it looks good, and like it's ready to go. Make sure they have the appropriate medical supplies. They need to help build their confidence, put them in a good position to perform their warm up well, and of course participate in the game well. And that's just like, and that we haven't gotten into the clinical side yet. So there's a lot of things to consider for sure. But I think that as long as you're consistent, like you as a medical provider, you're consistent and you've been finding ways to keep progressing yourself, the better serve the athlete in the organization. I think that's what's really going to help you short and long term wise.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any kind of like guiding principles or foundational concepts that you feel have helped you as a clinician with some of those soft skill type things that way?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we'll just make it simple. I'll just name like three. So one thing that I remember learning about, this was like back when I was like, oh gosh, like a fresh college kid, like I mean like fresh out of high school and everything. When I knew I wanted to pursue a career in professional sports, like one guy always taught me, he's like, as we know now, like, treat the person, not the injury. Always treat people with respect. Focus on things that what they cannot teach you in school, like being on time, being reliable, communicate as best you can. Make sure you're consistent, because those type of behaviors are what, in a sense, in my mind, will help you become an asset. Because anyone can learn didactic and clinical skills, but they can't teach you to be on time to work, show some type of initiative, develop conversations, that you can develop a relationship with the patient, in a sense, your coworkers. So those are the things that I was taught a long time ago, to focus on that and just make sure that you're always striving to learn something, develop as best you can. That way you have like a servant's heart to still help the athlete, in a sense, and organization. So, and also at the same time, when you are working on a team slash organization, always be respectful of everybody. Treat the janitor as if it's the CEO and vice versa. Because in my mind, everyone's got a role in the organization. So I want to make sure that if they come to me for like rehab or injury eval or treatment, anything along those lines, that I can help them do well and answer the questions, but also help them do well at their job. So that way the entire organization will still run smooth. I kind of think of it as like making sure all the parts of a car run smoothly so the car can move well. That's pretty much been my mindset over the past, like, oh gosh, 5, 10 years. I'll go with 10 years. I would say that, and it's pretty much served me pretty well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great mindset to have. And I think that that's something that I wish was promoted a little bit more early on for all future clinicians that way is I think those principles of just being of a servant-based mindset, as you mentioned, but also understanding that you've got to put people first at the end of the day. You're providing for people, or as Jill Lane has recently said on the podcast, it's all about championing other people. Geez, if I could talk. It's all about lifting other people up and kind of getting us all to that higher ground of life that we're all after that way. I don't necessarily think anyone gets higher by pushing others lower. So the more we can kind of help lift each other up in any facet, and sometimes that's, with what you're formally trained on, maybe that's your manual therapy skills or whatever. And other times that's, other things that you're maybe not formally trained on. So you never know what kind of impact and influence you can have on others. And I find that sometimes the impact we make from a rehab provider standpoint is just as strong, if not stronger, with some of those soft skills than it is with some of our formal training, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Like I'll give you a great example of having over the past years of basketball. You know, one thing that you never really know is, like, even if you look them up on Google, you don't really know what are the backgrounds of these players, really. You don't know, okay, and you really won't know what their personalities are like until you can get them to obviously talk. So, like, I remember, like, one specific player, I had trouble getting buy-in with him. He didn't say that much, But as soon as I like found some type of common ground to get him to talk, and ironically, it was like, what was it? Oh, it was something about yogurt. I got him like as soon as I started talking to him about yogurt, I got him to buy in right away, and like I was able to get him back on like his rehab program. It literally came down to talking about yogurt, which I find so ironic about because normally if you're treating the players or patients in general, you can make common small talk with like, hey, what are you gonna do for the weekend? Or hey, where are you from? Stuff like that. And sometimes you give one word answers, but I was very shocked by talking about yogurt. Somehow got someone to open up having full length conversations with me. I don't get it.
Yeah, no, it doesn't always make a whole lot of sense, but one of the things I always try and get people to understand is the conversations that you have with the athletes that you serve day in and day out are unique to them and always kind of about the things that they're interested in that way. So to your point, you might be talking about yogurt with one person. You might be talking about the best arm farm workouts with the next person. I think I certainly have my little 1,000 rep college special saved for the Friday night somewhere in my phone notes. Like, you never know what you're going to end up talking about. And I think that that's one of the things that makes this profession that we're in so fun and exciting is, it's not just about what you can do with your hands or what you can do from a like skill set standpoint. Now, don't get me wrong. That stuff is just as important. Obviously, you need to be able to provide for people, make some objective outcome improvements, and move the needle in the right direction. At the same point, if you can't take care of people and some of these other skills are not in check, then, athletes might not even want to work with you in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why I was going to say one other thing that's also served pretty well with working with players, I would say athletes in general, is that if you can make whatever you're doing, like let's say an exercise intervention, a manual therapy intervention, like anything along those lines, something that's skilled, as long as you on it, like the best buy-in you get, besides being a genuine person, is try and make it as specific as possible to the sport. Not so much like sport-specific conditioning or the rehab, like what you hear about on social media, but I mean simple things like a basketball player, give them the basketball, try and have them use the basketball in the exercise. That's where you will also get a significant amount of buy-in because at this level and the higher levels, this sport, their bodies, it's their bread and butter. It's their paycheck, their salary, you name it. So if you can try and do that to make it as specific as possible to keep them fully engaged, oh, it's going to work wonders for you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And just finding ways to get them around their sport earlier on that way, right? Whether that's literally just letting them walk through things at like a walking pace or just being around their team. I think that there's a whole new thing in this courtside, fieldside rehab world that is starting to take off now that I'm very excited about where the athlete can continue to do their rehab, but be right around their team and not necessarily separated from them, which I'm very excited about. And I think the more that you can just keep them engaged and give them this sense of control and autonomy in their rehab instead of just constantly being told what to do and when they're allowed to do certain things, the better off they're going to be.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with that. It's a little tricky depending on the injury, but as long as you keep them around the team as best you can, I think it'll make the athlete feel better from like an emotional support standpoint, but also I think it will also help the team overall as well. So they have their own ways of motivating each other within the roster.
Yeah, definitely. Now, you've got this unique role where you kind of wear the AT hat and the PT hat simultaneously as you've got degrees for both. But, historically, I've seen some issues that can occur with, interdisciplinary communication, if you will, that way. And personally, I think that as long as everyone is acting in the best interest of the athlete, and as long as everyone is willing to just have an honest conversation about things, you can't go wrong. And I think personally, I've probably made some mistakes in this space as well. I think everyone kind of graduates school and we think we run the world and we know everything. When in reality, it's like sometimes we actually serve people better by taking a little bit of a step back that way, if you will, and just kind of being part of the team and helping out where we can or filling gaps that way. I'm interested to hear a little bit more of your thoughts on what makes a interdisciplinary team so successful in rehab, and how can we as rehab providers better work together to provide for the athletes that we do serve?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Well, one, I think it depends on one, you need to know your role and where you function within like the hierarchy. Okay. Let's say if you're like say the top spot, like you gotta do your best to set the tone yourself. So one thing that I'm really big on is making sure that if the team will function on a daily basis, do daily meetings. That way, you're very consistent. You communicate within the departments. You know what's going on. There's less chance of things to fall through the cracks. It's also an opportunity for people from other departments to learn from each other. So that way, let's say someone is working on returning to play, everyone sees the injury, sees the person from different perspectives, and then it just helps with collaboration so much better. At least that's what I would like to do. But at the same time, it also comes down to communication. So you as like say the rehab experts, you could have the best intentions, be the most proactive person, but you need to make sure that the other people from other departments, they're receptive, but at the same time they're also proactive as well. And communication is not a one-way street, because when that happens, then things fall through the cracks. People don't see eye to eye, and sometimes there's tension build up. So you just gotta make sure that all the pieces of the puzzle pretty much match up with each other. At least that's what I've seen from my experiences. Because I've been in good ones, I've seen bad ones, and it literally came down to communication, consistency, and people's intentions.
I think that's a great point. And on that note as well, I think it's just having this willingness to be open-minded, right? Instead of looking at conversations like, battles between you and another provider about something. Like, I think we get so caught up in this kind of conversation of right versus wrong, when in reality, like, there's so much stuff that we don't know. And on top of that, there's thousands of different ways to get good outcomes, right? Look at how many clinicians exist within the United States alone that way. And they all probably have a slightly different approach to something like ACL rehab or Achilles rehab. And yet, they can still get consistently good outcomes, even though they have slight differences between them that way. There's thousands of different ways to get good outcomes. So I think it's ultimately a matter of, hey, it might not be what my original plan was, but that doesn't mean it's the wrong plan. It's, hey, what can I learn from this? What can I take away from this? And always looking to see how, you can provide value, but also, others can provide value to you. Again, I think we often get so close-minded into thinking that our way is the best way or the only way, when in reality, I think that we should be more open and encouraged to, open conversations and dialogues about how we collectively can improve as clinicians and how we can improve the plan of care that we're actually delivering that way, because it can always be better. And the moment we start settling for good enough is the day that we'll never have enough.
Yeah, that's true. You never want to become complacent. There's no doubt about it. And yeah, no, you're providing a lot of great points. I totally agree with you, man.
Yeah, it's just so interesting to see how this space has evolved and changed over time, because again, I speak from a little bit of personal experience here, but I feel like my understandings of how the space works and functions and kind of what my role was going to be within it has evolved a lot over the last several years. And it sounds like yours has been very similar as well, where again, it's just as much of a team from a sports med providing standpoint as it is a team on the actual court or field of play, if you will, that way. It's really a bunch of individuals trying to work together in the best interest for the people in front of them. And, maybe sometimes you do things that are a little bit unorthodox, or maybe a, different play or something like that that you haven't run before. But if it works and it gets the job done and nothing bad happens, then I'm making that transaction 9 times out of 10.
That's right. Yeah, no, you're right.
Now, Lee, you also mentioned that you've traveled around quite a bit and you've kind of lived in different parts of the United States that way, in addition to working in different disciplines within the PT space that way. What have your travels taught you about, the sports med and rehab experience that way? And have you seen anything that's worked really well at one thing at one place that you've been at, or one part of the country that you've been in, or anything that you've really kind of taken away from your past experiences that way?
As funny as it sounds, like I would say as a physical therapist and the PT profession, like since I left school, the profession has been breaking through barriers, and it's just been pretty wild to see how things go. I mean, but even within the country, depending on like what region you live or practice in, PTs practice very differently from each other. And I think that's interesting because there's cultures within the culture. I would say that, like, so for example, I'll give you a great example. Up in the Northeast, New York, a lot of people up there, they're really big on Mackenzie. Probably because the headquarters up in Syracuse. Might be a part of it. But if you go, like, say, to Texas, not many people use Mackenzie. They like to use other different methods and schools of thought, or even in the Mid Atlantic, they all, like, from what I remember, people didn't use Mackenzie that much. They like to go with like more of a different approach as well with rehab, exercise performance. So I would say like that's been very unique in itself, and I would say like adopting the different methods from how PTs practice in the different parts of the country, I would say has allowed me to be more of an eclectic clinician. For sure. And I think also at the same time being exposed to all those different cultures and schools of thought, it's really helped me read the between the gray lines of like say like a course and like what they want to advocate for or how they're being taught. I would say like that's helped me a lot over the years. And
Yeah.
it's actually helped me be selective in like what I want to pursue actually.
Yeah, it sounds like you've been able to kind of take little bits and pieces of everything instead of just going all in on one camp, if you will.
hmm So that's because I pretty much have learned, and I still go by these words that the human body is it's always complex. How it responds to rehab, if everyone's gonna be differently. So you can't be, in a sense, tunnel vision to a specific school of thought or specific skill or technique, because there will always be a new way to improve on like what you already learned. So you need to make sure you're constantly open minded and not become complacent, like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, no, exactly. Always open to new things and exploring new things and open to the next thing. And sometimes I've found that some of the things that I learn the most about are actually things that have been around for a long time. And for some reason, it just never came across my line of sight that way, if you will, that way. And I think that it's not just about looking forward. Sometimes it's about looking back and seeing, what used to work in the past and what can I take away from that. To give you an example, you mentioned the state of New York earlier. From the last I checked, again, to my best knowledge at this time, New York State does not allow the use of blood flow restriction or BFR, which I use for all of my ACL rehabs and all of my Achilles rehabs. And, I was thinking about that and I was like, BFR hasn't been around forever. There's been times when people had to move the needle forward and get results without a great modality. So, sometimes if you're put in that situation where maybe you don't have access to some of these things, you actually have to look backwards in order to move forwards, if you will.
That's right. And also at the same time, over the years, ever since I left school, probably the one modality that's been gaining the most interest and best ground in a sense for PTs, honestly, has been dry needling. On some states, like 5 years ago, there are some states in the country you couldn't legally do dry needling, and some you can. So I think that that's one modality that has honestly made been some pretty big changes over the years, and I think that's served me pretty well, just like it's served other clinicians very well.
You're saying you are dry needling certified, correct?
Oh yeah, I've been dry needling for several years, but I'm saying like when I first left school, I can say like the state of New York, you were not legally able to dry needle. Just like at the same time in California you couldn't do it, and I believe Florida was another state you couldn't do it back then.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great point. And it's funny you say that because I've certainly used dry needling with great success over the last, several months in Maryland that way, and a little bit before that in the state of Virginia as well. And I think it's one of those things that is very powerful and impactful, but it's just like everything that we do, right? There are tools in the toolbox, and you have to know when to reach for what tool that way. And I think there's benefits to having a big toolbox, but there's also benefits to knowing how to use tools in a lot of different ways because you can accomplish a lot of different things with the same intervention, or you could take one intervention like dry needling, for example, and you talk to 20 different providers and they'll do it 20 different ways, right? Some people do trigger points, some people stim it, some people leave it in for a while. Like there's so many little differences that exist between providers that way that I think there's ultimately so many different things that we can learn.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. And that's just dry needling we're talking about. There's a whole bunch of other skills we can talk about, and they all get done differently.
Yeah, and ultimately that goal is always going to vary that way. And again, there's many different ways to accomplish it, but Delaware, Maryland, I don't know what they call this area, the DMV or Delmarva or whatever it is that way, that exercise and almost this more like performance-based therapy model is certainly very prevalent and common that way. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about that a little bit more because again, that's certainly something that I'm seeing more and more of online that way. Is there necessarily like a time and a place for that? Is it going a little too far in your opinion? Or is this kind of the right direction for the sports med space to be going, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, like I like the idea. I think it's got a lot of perks to it. I think it will come down to what setting you're in. So if you're a PT and you operate your own clinic and you got your own program, hey, that's cool. So, keep running with that. It does get a little trickier, like when you're in the team-based setting because you have to I'm sure you have like the PT will have all these great ideas, but you need to make sure that you collaborate very well with the strength and conditioning coach and that department, and in some cases, the sports scientist. So that way you can honestly limit work, like watch out the workload. So that way you can limit the chance of someone who is return to play, but you're also limiting the chance of them experiencing some type of overuse injury at the same time. And at the same time, whatever performance-based interventions you have, just make sure it also aligns with what the strength and conditioning coach wants to accomplish as well, because you gotta be collaborative in that aspect. So that way you're not, what's the right word? Not overstepping boundaries or stepping on people's toes.
Yeah, exactly. It's a time and a place for everything, if you will. And it's one of those things where I've found that, I have no issue introducing people to stuff and progressing it during the course of their rehab. But, post rehab, I want them to do as much work as possible with strength and conditioning and continue to make those strides forward that way. And I think that the way you outlined that was really well. It's like, this is a good thing, but always be mindful of all the other factors and things in play in this situation, if you will. Strength and conditioning, AT, sports science, collaboration, and how we can all kind of best come together for the athlete. And again, honestly, I think if that's done well and done correctly, it should work in your favor because you don't have to know everything by yourself now. Right. For a lot of the stuff that I've done, I don't have anyone I can collaborate with in sports science, for example, here within my own facility. I don't have someone who's got a CPSS that I can go with for, force plate questions and other things that way. I have to kind of figure out a lot on my own, and I have to reach out to a lot of other people that I'm just thankful and fortunate enough to be connected with in my network that way, which has, been a huge help. But it's like, it's also really nice to have those people right down the hallway. So definitely, if you have those luxuries and you have those people there, like take advantage of the fact that, their knowledge and their expertise is sitting just minutes away from you.
Right, absolutely. And in some cases, if you don't have someone that's like down the hallway from you, or you go work on a team-based setting, one thing that you can have, let's say you're doing something strength and conditioning wise in the clinic with you. At least you can have documentation to back you up and say, hey, this is what so and so has done. Like say doing plyometrics, and you describe like what you've done, and then you pretty much just offer to them. That at least gives the strength and conditioning coach and or sports scientists an idea of where they're at functionally and what they're doing in terms of the realm of strength and conditioning. So in a sense, they technically, in theory, have their own foundation, and then they can just take it from there. But I think they would honestly appreciate you more, the fact that you gave that information, you were proactive, and you communicated well to them. I think that's, in the end, that's what they would honestly care more about.
100% agree, man. Lee, I guess I'm curious too. We've talked extensively about your past journey as a provider that way. We've talked about some of the different principles and lessons and frameworks that have led you to success that way. But ultimately, success always comes with a price that way. And I think one of the things that's not often discussed enough, in my opinion, is the opportunity cost that it takes to achieve success. We've talked about it with a number of athletes where, some of these college athletes are skipping proms and school dances and all these other memorable things in order to train more to get to the level of play that they're at, the level of competition that they're at. I'm curious, has there been anything that you've really had to give up or any cost to the success that you've experienced as a clinician that way?
Yeah, there were a lot of sacrifices I made over the years, no doubt about it, even before I entered the basketball world or just sports world. So within the sports world and basketball world, because of like how the seasons are set up, I'm not really near my family in person, so I don't really get a chance to spend really the holidays with them outside of, talking to them on the phone, FaceTime, so on from there. So I would say there's that, especially if you move to a new area that like you don't really know anybody. It can't, it can get tough because you don't have the emotional support basically. During the season, you do miss out on things like relatives' birthdays. In some cases, you might miss weddings. You might miss funerals. I've missed a few of those for sure. Sometimes you don't get that much free time because you're constantly on the road. You're constantly on call. I mean, it happens. So if you let it could interfere with your social life. It could interfere with your dating life. But that's where you gotta be real careful with finding that work-life balance. Honestly, you'll never be 50-50. There's no doubt about it. But as long as you can find some way that creates some type of dedicate some time to your personal things, I think that's what is what helps a lot with managing the stress during the season, and of course having like a very strong emotional support. So I would say like those are pretty big things I've pretty much have had to sacrifice. Like there's plenty of weddings that happened on the East Coast. I'm sorry, the South, when I was on the East Coast, and I just couldn't come because of the season. I would say ever since like I left PT school, like a lot of new PTs, I'm like I had this mindset like, oh, I want to go change the world. I'm gonna like be the best PT I can be. I want to do all these great things to help people. And not many people really follow up on that, but I was like pretty dedicated and determined to make sure that I could elevate my skill set as best I could.
Yeah, 100%, man, for sure. And I appreciate your openness with all of that. I guess I'm curious as a follow-up, you mentioned different, certifications like the manual fellowship, obviously SCS, OCS, and so on that way. Which one was the most challenging for you personally?
Crazy sounds, they were all challenging.
They're all like really difficult. Like I said, they're all equally impressive and difficult in their own way that way. But I was curious to hear which one was the most challenging because some people I've talked with have said like, oh my gosh, SCS was like impossible, but I did it. Some people have said, fellowship programs are like super challenging, but ultimately all those things are worthwhile. It's just a lot of time and effort put in to achieve them, I would say. Lee, this has been a great conversation covering a lot of different things in relation to the sports med space that way. Do you have any kind of closing thoughts or closing remarks or anything that we missed?
I would say that, everyone's got their own journey to how they want to pursue sports medicine or sports PT. Never lose sight of where you came from. Make sure you're still genuine. Make sure you have a goal in mind. You're still intentional. And I think that really will serve you the best in the end. I couldn't recommend it more. I think that as long as you're really genuine, people will never fault you for that, especially having good intentions. Like, there might be some conflict of personalities, but it's like that in there. I think that's like that in everywhere you go, everywhere you work. That would be the best recommendation. Just always have a plan, be genuine.
Yeah, that's 100%, man. For people who want to find out more about you online and so on that way, where can they find you at? Are you MySpace generation or?
Yeah, so what they could do is they could look me up on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Feel free to ask me any questions. I'll gladly answer them.
Awesome. We'll link to all of that in the description below. That way, if you didn't quite catch that, you can just click there and see everything that Lee is up to. Lee, this was awesome, man. Appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed the conversation as well.